It was October 13th, 1972, a day that began with laughter, hope, and the excitement of youth. A chartered plane carrying 45 passengers, mostly a Uruguayan rugby team, their friends, and family, took off toward Chile. The cabin buzzed with jokes, songs, and dreams of victory. No one aboard knew that fate had already written a nightmare in the snow. As the plane entered the heart of the Andes, clouds swallowed its wings. The pilot struggled through turbulence, relying on faulty instruments. Then a roar, a scream, and metal tearing apart. The aircraft struck a mountain ridge and broke into pieces. Bodies flew through the air. Silence followed chaos. When the snow settled, the Andes had claimed its victims. Miraculously, 33 people still breathed. They crawled from the wreckage, shivering, bleeding, terrified. The world around them was endless white. No trees, no animals, no sound but the wind. The temperature dropped below freezing. The survivors gathered what little they could: seats for shelter, broken luggage for food, and the will to live. Night fell like a curtain of death. Every breath hurt. Every heartbeat was a battle. They huddled together for warmth, whispering prayers and names of loved ones. In that frozen valley, far from the world, they realized a horrifying truth. No one knew where they were. For the world, Flight 571 had simply vanished. By the second day, the survivors faced the brutal reality. They were trapped. The radio had gone silent, and rescue seemed like a distant fantasy. Days passed with no aircraft in sight, only the blinding glare of snow and the sound of wind slicing through broken metal. Hunger began to claw at their stomachs. Thirst burned their throats. The mountain didn't care. It simply watched. They melted snow for water, rationed chocolate bars, and ate whatever scraps remained. Each day, hope grew weaker. The cold crept into their bones, and with every sunset, another person slipped away. Death was no longer a stranger. It was sitting beside them, waiting patiently. On the 8th day, their tiny world collapsed again. A sudden avalanche buried the fuselage under tons of snow, suffocating several survivors in their sleep. Screams echoed into the void, desperate, fading, then silent. Those who lived clawed their way out, gasping for air, shaken and broken. They had entered a new kind of hell. When morning came, they looked around, and there was nothing. Just a graveyard of snow. No rescue, no sound, no movement. The outside world had stopped searching. The radio crackled one last cruel message. The search had been called off. In that moment, surrounded by death and silence, something changed inside them. The fear of dying faded. Now they were ready to do anything to survive. Days turned to weeks. Hunger hollowed their faces, and their bodies grew weak and skeletal. The human body can endure pain, cold, and exhaustion, but not starvation. It drives people beyond morality, beyond reason. And there, in that endless white tomb, they reached the edge. One night, as the wind screamed outside, they spoke of the unthinkable, feeding on the frozen bodies of their dead friends. Silence followed, broken only by sobs. But reality was merciless. There was no food, no animals, no chance of rescue. The choice was simple: eat or die. Tears froze on their cheeks as they prayed. They begged forgiveness from the souls of their fallen brothers. Then, trembling, they did what no one should ever have to do. With shaking hands, they cut small pieces, not out of cruelty, but of despair. The taste was metallic, the act unbearable. Yet life demanded a price. Some refused, disgusted and broken. Others understood. Survival had no morality now. Days later, those same doubters joined in. The mountain had erased all lines between sin and salvation. The act kept them alive, just barely. But their minds began to fracture. They dreamed of rescue, of warmth, of mothers waiting by doors that would never open again. They had crossed into madness, but they were breathing, and for now, that was enough. The Andes had turned into a silent cemetery. Around the wreckage lay bodies, frozen, pale, untouched by time. The living spoke to them, prayed beside them, and drew strength from their sacrifice. They called the place the Valley of Tears. Every sunrise was another test of will. Every heartbeat a miracle. Snowstorms raged, burying all traces of hope. Nights felt eternal. Their skin cracked from the cold, their lips bled, their minds played cruel tricks. They hallucinated food, warmth, voices of loved ones. But the mountain was deaf, yet amid despair humanity flickered. They comforted each other, shared memories, sang softly to forget the silence. Leadership emerged, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa, two young men with fire still burning in their souls. They refused to die in the snow. They began to plan, to climb out, to find help, no matter the cost. But the mountains were merciless. Miles of peaks and cliffs stretched in every direction, each higher than the last. Thin air burned their lungs. The sun blinded their eyes. Still, they prepared. They saved scraps of insulation, made makeshift sleeping bags, and waited for the right day. Each night before sleep they whispered a single promise: "We will return with help." No one believed it, but they had no other hope left. On December 12th, after 2 months in hell, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa stepped out of the fuselage for the last time. Their friends watched them fade into the white horizon, two specks against the endless snow. They carried little more than courage and fragments of human flesh for food. Their destination was unknown. Their only guide, the sun. For 10 days they climbed mountains that scraped the sky. They slipped, fell, bled, and froze. At night they buried themselves in snow to survive the cold. Hunger gnawed at their souls, exhaustion at their sanity. But they refused to stop. Each peak they conquered revealed only more mountains, an infinite maze of death. And yet they kept walking, because behind them were people waiting to be saved. Because somewhere beyond that horizon, the world was still alive. Finally, after days of despair, they saw something, a trace of green. It was the first color they had seen in months. Hope surged. The snow gave way to rock, then to grass. Then, in the distance, a river, and across it, a man on horseback. They screamed with the last of their strength. The man could not hear them, but he saw. The next day, rescuers arrived. Nando and Roberto had done the impossible. They had found life in the land of the dead. On December 22, 1972, 72 days after the crash, the miracle began. Helicopters roared over the Andes, slicing through clouds that had hidden the survivors for weeks. Below, those still trapped in snow waved desperately, tears streaming down frost-bitten faces. They had been found. One by one, they were lifted from the valley that had swallowed their youth. The world watched in disbelief. How had anyone survived this long, in such horror? When news broke, it shook humanity to its core. People called them heroes, miracles, monsters. But only they knew the truth. They were not heroes. They were just human beings who did what was necessary to live. The world wanted to celebrate them. They only wanted to forget. Reporters asked about the miracle of the Andes, but behind their eyes lived images they would never escape. As the helicopters carried them away, they looked back one last time at the snow-covered wreckage, their prison, their battlefield, their home. In that silence, they left behind friends, brothers, and a part of their souls. The mountains remained still, indifferent, eternal. When they returned home, the world greeted them with applause, then with horror. The truth of their survival leaked out. People could not comprehend it. They had eaten the flesh of their friends. Newspapers called them cannibals. Churches debated their sins. But those who had never faced death could not understand what it meant to fight for life. The survivors remained silent. Their eyes carried the weight of 72 days that words could never explain. For them, it wasn't about guilt or glory. It was about remembering those who gave life so others could live. They were not monsters. They were proof of the unbreakable human spirit. Years later, some spoke openly, not for fame, but to honor the dead. They told the world that faith, love, and courage had survived even when hope had died. The mountain had stripped them of everything: clothes, food, names, but it could not take their humanity. Society of the snow. That's what they called themselves. A society built not on wealth or power, but on survival, sacrifice, and unity. In those 72 days, they created their own world, ruled by compassion, faith, and the raw instinct to live. Every breath they took was borrowed. Every heartbeat was a victory. They learned that life is fragile, and that hope, once lit, can survive even in the darkest storms. Years later, when the movie Society of the Snow was made, audiences finally witnessed their suffering, not as a story of death, but of rebirth. It reminded the world that the human spirit, even when buried under ice and fear, can rise again. In the Andes, the snow still falls. The wreckage still lies there, frozen in time, a silent memorial to the 45 souls who took that flight. Some never returned, but their story will never die, because beyond the mountains, beyond the snow, beyond the fear, humanity lives.